What are hand ranges? And how do you begin to estimate the range of hands that your opponents have?
Yeah. So I actually, speaking of YouTube, I did a video on specifically this, getting familiar with rangers.
Yes.
And essentially, back in my day, the old days, we didn't talk about poker that way. We're like, I think he's got this or I think he's got that, right? Nobody thought of like the range of hands a player can have. So I guess the best example is imagine like all the potential hands as being a part of a grid, right? So the first player to act, they could have any one of those hands, right? Any one randomly dealt, right? But let's say now that player raised to $3,000. Okay, well, you can eliminate now from this grid a whole bunch of hands that this player can no longer have. Because if they had a 2 and a 3, they wouldn't do that. So you can say, okay, he probably has a big pair. He has ace king. You've narrowed the range of hands down, right? Now, through every action on the flop, on the turn, and on the river, based on the decisions they make, you narrow it down even further. So the range of hands is the whole, the entirety of all the possibilities that this player you believe could have. And sometimes they fool you, or they have a hand that you don't expect them to have in their range. And, maybe a little bit unorthodox, doing some things you don't expect to throw you off. But a range is essentially all the possibilities, and it narrows as before the flop, it's endless. Player raises, okay, it's minimized. Player bets the flop, okay, it's minimized further. And then by the river, you can narrow down the entire range to, just maybe even a few hands.
Is it always shrinking, or is there sort of, as you get surprised? I mean, it's always just an estimate. So does it ever expand based on sort of chaotic, unpredicted, surprising behavior of the players?
It really should never expand. The range of hands should always get smaller, right? Like, again, we start with the full scope, and then you should factor in like, okay, these are all the possible hands you can have on the flop now, right? We can't have new hands on the turn. And if you get to that point where you think, oh, well, maybe he has this hand, then you sort of misjudged his range prior. So you're not thinking clearly. It should always shrink from the full scope to, hopefully just a couple.
Well, in that video, you also talk about it used to be that you would play your hand, but now you're playing a range, that you're representing a range. You're not even just playing your hand. So what does it mean to represent a certain range?
Yeah, so that's another big thing that's different about poker from, my day to today, is that back in our day, we would like put people on one hand. I'm like, you probably have king 9 or you have jacks or something like that. Now, people are cognizant of the idea that you could have an entire range of hands. So then you ask yourself in situations, all right, I know what I have, but what I could have in his mind or my opponent's mind is any one of these hands. What would I do with the entirety of these hands? And so a lot of people that are trying to play optimally, game theory optimal, they think in terms of what their range of hands would do rather than their very specific hand.
So is bluffing in that context essentially misrepresenting the range of hands that you have?
No,
is that how you think about it?
Not exactly. Because so an optimal range, like if I bet the river, if I'm playing game theory optimal, a portion of my range is going to be, I have it, I got the best hand, and a portion of my range is going to be bluffs, and they'll be balanced. So in theory, no matter what you do, if you call or you fold, in theory, it's just you're printing a zero, as we say. You're not gaining or losing any EV if you were to do it that way.
What's EV?
EV is expected value, right? So every play that you make, it either is going to, in the long run, make you some money, or it's just a losing play. And as a professional, you try to make the fewest amount of minus EV plays you can. And the only reason you would make these minus EV plays is potentially if you were trying to set up your opponent for something later, right? So I might make some minus EV plays, right? So that I can exploit you later, right?
So you're building up
an image,
a player profile that's false in some way.
Something that I'm going to plant seeds in your mind so that I can exploit them later. So for example, why would players like show a big bluff?
Yeah.
Like what would be the reason for that? They show a big bluff so that you know that they're capable of it. But maybe in their mind, they're never going to do that again. But now they think, he bluffed me last time. Maybe he's doing it again. But that's what we call like a leveling war, because you can go back and forth with whether or not, okay, this guy might know that. Like he showed a bluff because he's never going to bluff me again. So that's where it gets a little.
So that's a little bit different. When we're talking about hand ranges, that's different than building up a mental model of what your opponents think of you and what your opponents think that you think of them, and so on and so forth. Are you trying to construct those kinds of mental models? And is that separate from the hand ranges?
They go hand in hand, right? So if in a given situation, right, my range has this many value hands and this many bluffs, okay? So in theory, if I want to be balanced, this is my range and this is what it looks like. I'll bet this 50% of the time, bet this 50% of the time. However, if I know that you think that I bluff too much, right, then I'm not going to bluff as much. I'm going to start, instead of betting these hands that I would 50-50, now what I'll do is I'll do like 70-30, where I'm basically value betting most of the time against you, or vice versa. If I know you always fold because you think I have it, I'm going to veer the other way. And instead of bluffing 50%, I'll bluff 70-80% of the time to take advantage of your perception of me.